Right, so Keir Starmer's ceasefire stances have proven he has more faces than a town clock, frankly, as yet again he is gaslighting us as to what he actually wants by way of peace in the Middle East. And the ongoing attacks by Israel on Gaza, and to my mind it shows that having been wrong-footed, with severe polling damage having been wrought amongst Muslim voters, this slight change of stance might just make this statement a bit of a begging letter to all of those Muslim voters Labour has lost over this genocide because of his pathetic posturing in relation to it. The only line on this he has stuck to is Israel's right to defend itself from people whose land they have been occupying for decades, and people know the history, the truth, and more eyes are being opened to that daily. But of course we've seen a 4-day ceasefire now, haven't we? This has now been extended by a further 2 days until Wednesday. Now, Starmer, the man who said a ceasefire would embolden Hamas, the man who said humanitarian pauses where the killing could resume once aid had been sent in was better, now wants a longer ceasefire. Says more time is needed as it becomes abundantly obvious that actually Hamas can be negotiated with. Actually, they will obey a ceasefire. Actually, it's Israel that has broken that ceasefire multiple times, and the relief from being blown to bits means aid can still get in. News to the former human rights lawyer that people don't need to keep being killed after for that to happen. Well, naturally he's been shredded for his naked opportunism once again, for being the man with more flip-flops than a beach hut. Right, so Keir Starmer, for it is he, yet again, embarrassing himself publicly by thinking we've all forgotten about his multiple different positions on the Israel-Gaza genocide that has been playing out for getting close to 2 months now. The man bought and paid for by the Israel lobby was always going to be backed into a corner over this matter. He can't afford to come out against Israel and on the side of Palestine, so he's moved on from the indefensible excuse that Israel has a right to defend itself, when actually international law was more on the side of Palestinians having the right as an occupied people to resist occupation. The only both sidesing in this matter is that innocent lives on both sides have been lost, and they must be condemned on both sides for that. Hamas certainly are guilty of some of that, but evidence is there that Israel are guilty of multiple war crimes, not just in Gaza, but against their own people as well. Starmer, of course, has now moved to a position of both sidesing this matter entirely. It's frankly as far as he dare go without upsetting his pro-Israeli paymasters in the lobby. But after weeks of backing Israel publicly, after threatening his MPs with a sack if they backed a ceasefire, resisting calls for a ceasefire not just because of the lobby, but because Labour foreign policy is being dictated by Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak, the fact a ceasefire was brokered thanks to the sterling efforts of Qatar, nothing to do with the US or the UK, Starmer has been forced to admit that actually the ceasefire he pointlessly lost 10 front benchers over, who resigned to rebel against his senseless stupidity, was the right idea after all. If only he learnt to listen to other people apart from Peter Mandelson. Not only that, though, but it is causing Labour severe electoral damage by Starmer, that Zionist without qualification, solidly living up to that title. Muslim voters have abandoned Labour in their droves, according to poll after poll, and the recent events I've been covering in Newham Borough Council and the rise of the Newham Independent Group, which I've covered in recent content, can be, at least in part, directly attributed to that. However, he can't admit to being wrong. He'll just pretend it was always our position. It's what he always does. He sees admitting a mistake as a weakness, when not being able to do so is the biggest character flaw there is. Nonetheless, this is where he's gone, and worse for him, he felt the need to issue another statement along those lines, frankly doubling up as a begging letter to Muslim voters to boot as it did, in my opinion. It reads, "The cessation of hostilities which has been in place since Friday has delivered some relief after weeks of pain and suffering. However, more time is needed if we are to build on this progress. We have all been moved by the images of released hostages reuniting with their families, but many more remain captive, their families in agony. Hamas should release all remaining hostages now, and we must support every diplomatic effort to get them out as quickly as possible. The last few weeks have been an unimaginable nightmare for Palestinians. The civilian death toll, including women and children, has been far too high. We have seen improved access to aid, food, fuel and medicine in Gaza, yet more time is needed to ease the unnecessary and intolerable humanitarian catastrophe. There are also urgent repairs to the civilian infrastructure that need to happen so that aid can be distributed. Today's agreement to extend the cessation of hostilities shows further extensions are possible. Therefore, I call on all parties to build on this progress and work urgently towards a further extension. This will allow for the release of further hostages and deliver more humanitarian relief for those in desperate need. An extension would undoubtedly ease tensions in the region. Israel needs to be assured that Hamas cannot carry out an attack like October 7th ever again. Palestinians need to be assured that the future will not be like the past, and they and their children will be able to enjoy the opportunities and rights that we take for granted. As well as allowing more hostages out and more aid in, an extension of the cessation of hostilities would also allow more work on ensuring what follows the war is a political solution that ends further violence. He really is the most contemptible shit in politics. How dare you, of all people, say this? My blood was boiling as I was reading it, so permit me to shred this before I go any further. He talks of weeks of pain and suffering which this ceasefire, extended as it now is, has halted, yet if he had his way after a drink and something to eat, Palestinians can continue to be gunned down or blown up. Hamas should release all the hostages now, he says, as if they're the only ones holding them. For every hostage Israel released, which Starmer doesn't mention, Israel took captive just as many people over the weekend in the West Bank. Where's his criticism of that? Whoops, I forgot who bankrolls him, didn't I? We've been moved by images of people reuniting with families, but you'll be hard-pressed to find Palestinian families celebrating reunions as such, because the IDF went around warning them not to, or they'd be taken back into administrative detention in violation of the ceasefire. No mention of that either, eh, Keith? Aid is getting in, he said, not north of Gaza City, though, because just as civilians were shot at by the IDF when they tried to return north, aid trucks were as well, again in violation of the ceasefire. He admits the ceasefire is working and extensions are possible. That's the closest to an admission that he was wrong as you're going to get, but don't push him on it. He'll just pretend that was his position all along. Only Israel needs assurance that Hamas can't repeat what happened on October 7th, apparently, not the Israeli people in the kibbutzes who might appreciate reassurance that an Apache gunship won't show up again and cut them down as well, because the evidence is there that Hamas didn't kill all of those people on October the 7th, but again, no mention of that from Starmer. Let's skirt over that. Some of my donors might not like it. Further extensions would allow for a political solution. Well, how many politicians and media pundits have bleated that you can't negotiate with Hamas then? You can't negotiate with terrorists. Well, all peace at the end of war comes about the same way. Both sides talk. It was a stupid narrative, and I'm reminded of Piers Morgan and Jeremy Corbyn again on this as I wrote that, because nothing exemplifies the ignorance and dumbing down of people by our media more than Morgan gobbing off incessantly and stopping anyone else getting a word in, demanding that condemnation of Hamas again. No condemnation of collective punishment from Starmer, no overt blame for all the civilian deaths, even now. Starmer, I said he both sides things, didn't I? He didn't really at all. Even now he's backing Israel, really. If he hopes to win back Muslim voters by becoming pro-ceasefire, he's missed the boat. It's too late, and he doesn't go far enough anyway. And besides that, he's missed out all the important bits, as I indicated, that they will have been looking for him to say. A direct condemnation of Israel's actions, of Israel taking hostages, of Israel killing so many more people than Hamas did, of the destruction of Gazan infrastructure committed by the IDF. There's none of that there. I can actually see the Muslim vote share for Labour dropping even further, and it only sits at around 5% now, already down from some 76%. But I'm hardly the only person holding Starmer to account over this, because at time of writing, his statement, put out on Twitter, some 12 hours old-ish, as I was writing this, has been retweeted just 350 times. This is a guy that has 1.4 million followers. Though how many of them are real is another story. But it really does go to show how utterly unimpressed by this people are. Of those 350 retweets, though, some 150 of them are quote tweets. And none of them are Starmer friendly. Let's have a look at a couple of them, shall we? The Not the Andrew Marr Show Twitter account said, "How many days will you give the people of Gaza, Sir Keir?" Well, indeed, how much more of a cessation in hostilities, as Starmer put it, is enough, because he couldn't actually bring himself to say the word ceasefire. That would have been too on the nose, too obvious. He'd have been called out for that, and he can't be found to be wrong, can he? Navarra Media's Aaron Bastani wrote, "Complete opposition of what Labour's John Healey overtly said before the ceasefire. The most cynical person in British politics is Keir Starmer. His supporters would reply, quite understandably, that it's working. But can you carry on like that in government? I don't think so." He's right. If Starmer thinks he's getting away with lying like he does now, he'll never manage it in power when his decisions dictate actual policy, and he wouldn't get away with it with so many more eyes on him then, his actions having consequences. Feature writer for the Morning Star, Richard Red Star, wrote, "But you didn't want a ceasefire and threatened your own MPs who did want to vote for one with the sack. You sat back while Israel were bombing and killing Palestinian women and children in revenge for the 7th of October. We see you for what you are." And that sums it up in one. That is exactly what Starmer has done and will do again, should hostilities resume. Key quote that I've seen that I'm going to finish with is from Linda Sale, who said, "It would have been better if you had said nothing rather than post this insult to Palestinian suffering." and that I 100% agree with. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer is turning being wrong into an Olympic sport, with Israel having broken this ceasefire already on multiple occasions and Hamas actually holding Israel to account for that. But he's learning nothing. Money from donors speaks louder to him than our votes do, apparently, as he loses more and more of them over this. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.